Hello, everyone, and welcome to our live stream that we are going to have today. As you know, this month we celebrate Disability Pride Month, so we are going to have this amazing live stream with our amazing guest Hannah to discuss more on Pride Month and sexual reproductive health. And we are waiting for our guest Hannah to join. And I think you're here. Hi, Hannah.
Hi,
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm really good, thank you. I want to thank you so much for joining us in this live. I know that you are such an amazing person, an amazing advocate. The work you do is so valuable and amazing, just
Oh,
amazing all
thank you.
around. So I'm really happy that we can highlight you and hopefully have this conversation so that more people can learn and just know more about the subject.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm so glad we can make all the time zones and stuff work because I think na navigating between America and Australia was always going to be tricky, but we've done
No,
it quite well.
thank you so much for being accommodating. So I'm really happy about
No,
that.
no worries.
So yeah, I'm going to, for everybody joining us, this live stream is about Disability Pride Month, comprehensive sexual and reproductive health rights for everyone. We have our guest, Hannah. Could you please introduce yourself, chat about the work you
Yeah,
do?
yeah. So before I do that, I just want to quickly acknowledge that I am on uh, unceded Indigenous land right now, and that this land that I'm on, where I'm speaking to you from my room, is uh, the land of the Darawal people. Here in Australia, that's something we do. We recognise the land of the Indigenous tribes and clans that
Mm-hmm,
we're on.
mm-hmm,
But yeah, my name's Hannah Diviney. I am a writer, disability advocate, an actress, a media personality. I wear many hats.
mm-hmm. Yes, you are a very talented person.
Thank
And I do want
you.
to thank you for the clarification you made. As somebody from Latin America, I think it's so important to recognize the colonization of areas and territories. So that's
Yeah.
really great. So yes, the first thing I want to do is, since this is a live stream for everybody to learn, to just know more about the topic, how would you say is the best way to acknowledge or describe the disability community, or what's the best way to name them and talk to them?
So for me personally, my preference is always to be referred to as disabled. Some people prefer people with disability first, they prefer the people first, or some people don't mind. They're okay if you put disabled first. It For me it doesn't really matter, but yeah, I am disabled. I'm okay with being called disabled. That's a part of my identity. Some people have issues with that, and a lot of able-bodied people will try and come up with different names for that, like differently abled or whatever it might be. But I think it's better to just call a spade, and it's better to just be honest about what our lives are like. And I don't think we can do that until we get the language
Yes,
right.
that's really great. It's a question that I have because I think a lot of people, especially those who are able-bodied, we want to know what's the best way to
Yeah,
discuss the topic. And obviously, the people who know the best are the ones who go through it. So
yeah.
it's really great
Lived
to have your
experience is
insight.
always
Hmm.
is always important, and I think the whole world, regardless of disability or not, uh, can should always be looking to people who have experience in whatever they're curious or unsure about, to help guide them.
Yes, of course. I think learning is the best way we can move forward, everybody. And even if we're not a part of the community, it's always great to learn and educate yourself and just try your hardest because life is hard as it is. So it's best to just try to uplift each other.
Yeah.
Um, so I guess to begin, I'd like to ask you, what does Disability Pride Month mean to you?
That's a really interesting question because for a long time I didn't know that July was Disability Pride Month. I didn't know that such a celebration existed. I was probably about 19, I think, when I first heard of Disability Pride Month, and it was through a, a wonderful corner of the internet called Tumblr, that I learned that it existed. So thanks, Tumblr, for being being my educational source on that one. But yeah, it means a lot to me because it's about showcasing who disabled people are, um, being a part of the community, but it's also something that I recognize would have been really, really helpful for my self-esteem and self-worth and sense of identity growing up. Like, I think if I had learned to celebrate my disability whilst also recognizing the hard parts, and giving them like the adequate space to grow instead of um, kind of searching high and low for representation all the time, which I never really found, that would have helped a lot. And I probably
Hmm.
wouldn't have some of the trauma and psychological kind of challenges that I do now in terms of making myself feel okay to take up space, making myself
Hmm.
feel comfortable to have a voice, trying to imagine what my future might look like, all of that kind of stuff.
Hmm. I think what you're saying is so powerful. Finding a voice, no matter what whose voice it is very hard. And I
Yeah,
think that honestly, like it's just the past couple of years I also learned that we have Disability Pride Month. It wasn't prior knowledge. It's not something that I was taught in school. It's
yeah,
not something that's usually highlighted in mainstream media, which I find very unfortunate because I
me too.
think, the work goes on throughout the whole year, but a month is very important because that's when we can get to know more voices, get to know more work,
Yeah.
and we need to do that. Hmm.
We do have International Day of of Persons with
Hmm.
Disabilities, which is recognized every December 3rd. But often, what I find happens on that particular day is lots of people will focus on that for the day, and then as
Hmm.
soon as it's over, their allyship uh, disappears, or their interest in
Hmm.
being publicly kind of aligned with the cause is less. So I think
Hmm.
it's super important tr- to remember that though we have days, like it's the same with International Women's Day, I guess.
Yeah.
It doesn't really mean much if you're just building it around that kind of one day, and if your behavior on the other 364 days of the year is not inclusive or not supportive or whatever it might be.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think a lot of the time, some people might ascribe to a holiday, or for example, Pride Month, like
Hmm.
you mentioned, Women's Day, but as soon as it goes away, they don't care. Or
Yeah,
people who don't
exactly.
practice it in real life, maybe some politicians, maybe some people who have more power, they don't really follow through the rest of the year, which is very unfortunate because progress can only be made once we acknowledge the problems we have.
Absolutely. I also just want to say thank you to the person who's written that I'm amazing down here. I saw your comment. It's so nice. I really appreciate it. And hi, um, to the person who's watching from Brazil. That's really cool. Uh, it blows my mind that I get to do advocacy that is seen by people all over the world.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think everybody should hear your voice and hear your story
Oh,
because it's
thanks.
truly inspiring. So I want to go ahead and ask you more about your experience in regards to sexual and reproductive health rights.
Hmm.
Here at Safe to Choose, we really focus on abortion support and abortion information, but I think sexual and reproductive health rights is really just a big envelope of many issues.
Yeah.
So, could you share more, like, of your experience? Have you found any barriers? Has it been easy? What is it like for
So
you?
I think sexual and reproductive health for women, regardless of whether they have
Hmm.
disabilities or not, is already going to be pretty complicated. And based on the kind of current political landscape, particularly in the United States and
Yeah.
in surrounding countries, that we're seeing reproductive rights uh, be targeted and erased, which is really scary because people who can get pregnant deserve the ability to have autonomy and choice over their bodies. But I think when you add in disability, whether it's physical, invisible, psychological, um, neurodivergence of some kind, things get complicated. And they get complicated because for a lot of people, disability and sexual or reproductive health don't exist in the same sphere. In that, for a lot of people, the idea of someone with a disability being sexually active is
Mm-hmm.
uh, weird to think about or
Mm-hmm.
difficult to consider. And I think that's just a kind of terribly ableist,
Yeah.
um, but unfortunately pervasive kind of myth is that like, oh well, why would a disabled person need that? They don't want to have sex. They don't have desires. They don't need to worry about starting a family or any of that kind of
Mm-hmm.
stuff. And I think that unfortunately that's down to a pretty dire lack of representation across the board. Um, for me, I was lucky enough. The first job I had as a professional actor was to do a series called Latecomers,
Mm-hmm.
um, here in Australia, and in that I got to do a sex scene, which meant that I was the first person with a disability in the history of Australian
Wow.
television uh,
Uh-huh.
to do a sex scene, which is amazing.
Yeah.
Not a piece of history I thought I would ever own, obviously. But also the fact that it took until 2022 for that to happen is really kind of desperately sad in some
Yeah.
ways. As much as I'm proud and happy to carry that baton and have that legacy, but I think it shocked a lot of people. This series about these disabled people experiencing pleasure and wanting relationships because it made people uncomfortable. Like for me, um, whenever relationships were discussed, particularly when I was a teenager, but still now, and you'd have those discussions about, oh, what my future partner might look like with your friends in the playground or whatever. People would always assume or project that any future partner I had to be disabled too.
Mm-hmm.
And when I pressed them on that, they were kind of like, well, you know, it would be easier.
Mm-hmm.
And most of the time when they said this, they like weren't meeting my eye or
Yeah.
able to kind of really explain why they thought that. And my follow up was always, well, easier for who? Easier for
Yeah.
me? Easier for them? Or easier for the imaginary kind of third party in all of this, which is the able-bodied person who then doesn't have to date me, doesn't have to worry. So I think when unfortunately that's the baseline, we have a lot of ex- uh, we have a lot of progress to make. Unfortunately, thank you so much. I'm so glad you liked Latecomers. That's so nice. Um, but I think it's yeah. When that's the baseline, we have a long way to go. I mean, I was lucky. I went to mainstream
Mm-hmm.
school, so I got the same kind of sex education in that sense as everyone else, um, which I'm sure isn't always the case
Mm-hmm.
if you go to a non-mainstream school. I'm not sure um, what the protocol for sexual education and consent and all of those things are, but I think when you know that the kind of pervasive myth is that disabled people are non-sexual beings versus the fact that we are overrepresented in like sexual violence
Yeah.
statistics.
Yeah.
It's kind of a weird position to be put in.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think I would also like to tell you first that it takes a lot of strength and a lot of courage to confront these norms. Like you mentioned, people would say, oh, you have to have a partner who is also disabled. finding that voice and speaking your truth is absolutely amazing. So that's the first thing I do want to say.
Thank you.
You also mentioned a point which I can attest to as an able-bodied woman. I've had so much issues trying to find adequate SRHR services, or I go, for example, to
Yeah.
the gynecologist, and I'm like, I have this issue, and it took me like 4 gynecologists to find somebody who could be like, okay, this is what you have. You weren't like imagining it.
Yeah, and I think unfortunately, there's so much internalized
Mm,
misogyny and sexism, and then there's other like intersectional issues embedded in that, depending on what race you are, depending on if you speak English as a first language, depending on all sorts of things, um, around women even accessing healthcare. And I know that here in Australia we have kind of a world first study happening in one of our
mhm,
states, Victoria, into women's pain, and
mm, mhm,
like particularly through the lens of conditions like endometriosis or
mhm.
polycystic ovarian syndrome and all of those kind of things that a lot of women experience, but it takes them forever to be diagnosed or to be taken seriously or to receive the right treatment or that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and actually, now that you mention it, I did some research lately, and I think I came across that study from Australia, and it was so impactful because I read things like women were saying that they had really bad pain, they had really bad cramps, and at
Mm,
the most they'd get like an ibuprofen and like a hot water bottle, and
yeah.
okay, you can leave, which is ridiculous because pain is pain. Like we should be adequately, studied. We have a comment that says such a valuable discussion you're having. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Anybody who's
Yelena.
here,
That's so
it's
nice.
so nice. And if you're here and you have any questions, please leave them
Yeah,
below
just put
because
them
this
in
is
the
an open
put them in the
discussion.
chat.
Yeah, we're here to chat and to get to know more about Hannah and everything for Disability Pride Month. But with what you mentioned, would you say that you would consider that disabled people had adequate representation in SRHR? You mentioned that you were the first one in acting, so I can imagine the answer, but I'd like to know more about your
Yeah,
thoughts on it.
I think the 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 obvious answer
Mm-hmm,
is no. But I also think that irrespective of disability, we just have a long way to go in general in terms of how we treat women and represent them in that space. But yeah, for sure, intersectionally, the lack of disabled representation is really scary, particularly because like here in Australia, at least 20% of our population has a disability. And I say at least
mm-hmm,
because those statistics don't represent all of the people who may have who may not have a diagnosis or who may not have disclosed, or there's various reasons. And I'm not sure what it's like for you where you are in terms of the size of your disabled
mm-hmm.
population and the representation, but the fact that that's 1 in 5 people and that we're still so far behind the needle on where we should be in having these conversations and in having these kind of valuable
Mm-hmm.
steps forward tells me there's a long way to go. And I think, unfortunately, like I said, it's down to lack of representation, whether that be politically or in media or in terms of people with lived experience or specific knowledge and care in the health system itself. There's just loads of different areas where it can be improved.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, I agree. I think personally, where I'm from, I would say that there is representation of disabled people, some disabled women, but nothing particular to women's issues. So it's very
Yeah.
difficult because, there, like you mentioned a lot, this important word that is intersectionality, the intersections of different characteristics or identities of a person, which really affect the way that they can access SRHR, they can access their right for gender equality.
Yeah.
And I think that I don't know. Maybe sometimes I feel like, as for example, women, we might lack an advocacy for those who are disabled, and we really need to step that up because if one of us isn't doing well, none of us are going to do well. So we really need
Exactly.
to, yeah, work on that. And I think it's so important because you know, like there's so many things that we can need to like check into intersectionality, like LGBTQ plus rights, the rights of the disabled community, the fight for those who are in colonized spaces. You know, there's so much we can
Yeah,
do. Hmm.
absolutely. And I think the thing that people forget about disability in particular is that it exists in the community at large, but it also exists inside every other intersection you can possibly think of.
Hmm.
Like there are disabled people who are existing and needing support in colonized spaces. There are disabled people of color. There are disabled members of the LGBTQIA plus community. There are disabled women. There are all sorts of different versions of a disabled life that need to be represented. And I'm very conscious that it's easier for me to be a public facing advocate,
Hmm.
probably because number one, I my disability isn't hard to look at, and
Hmm.
by that I mean like I'm somewhat conventionally attractive. I my body generally follows the standards of
Hmm.
beauty. I guess I'm lucky. Like people who experience facial disfigurement as part of their
Yeah.
disability or other kind of bodily disfigurement don't get taken as seriously because of how they look. Or like I'm super lucky because I'm a white woman,
Hmm.
and that makes it easier. That gives me white privilege to access certain spaces and to make sure that, yes, while my voice might not always be heard
Hmm.
all the time, it's more likely to be heard than a disabled person of colors, which is
Yeah. Yeah. No,
something
I
I'm
think,
really conscious of.
yeah, I think it's so important that you're highlighting this part of the intersectionality. But I think it's also very valuable that you are one of the voices that can be heard, because we have one like a foot already in the door. You're gonna open so many spaces for a lot of people, which is just amazing.
Thank you.
Um, in terms of SRHR, as I mentioned before, we are safe to choose, so we deal a lot with
Yeah.
being able to provide people with the option for choice.
Mhm.
Would you say that those who are in the disabled community have this luxury of choice? Maybe in the context of Australia, do you think that they have the choice to be mothers or the choice to have an abortion? What would you say the landscape is like?
Um, I would say, and keeping in mind, I'm 24, so
Hmm.
I'm not quite at the point in my life yet where I'm exploring fertility and reproductive spaces, just because um I'm n- not in a life stage where I'm ready
Hmm.
to have a family, but I would love to one day. So I will probably have more experience in the years to come. But from what I can understand, it's still pretty bare out there. Like I know that forced
Yeah,
sterilization of disabled women has long been a practice, which is absolutely um
disgusting. It's
yeah,
yeah.
just abhorrent to think about.
Hmm.
I if I think about it too long, I just become a raging ball of angry flame.
And you
But
should. You should.
yeah, but equally, I know women who want to have a family, um, and are in the process of getting their eggs frozen or investigating their options or trying to figure out how they can do it accessibly, and they're meeting with barriers to access because it could be something as simple as they're not able to get on a bed themselves, so they
Hmm.
need special equipment to do that, like just a hoist, and like getting the money to do that, or get, getting the funding and a clinic that's willing to i- i- install the machine and do all the work that would need to be done
Hmm.
is impossible. But then again, I know disabled mothers. I know women who are happily raising their
Hmm.
children and have been able to do that. But I think the luxury that they have had is obviously family
Hmm.
support. They've had some financial kind of landing or privilege, however extensive or small that may be. But I think across the board, it's still really hard for disabled people to be parents, and for um, disabled people to be taken seriously as wanting to be parents.
Mm-hmm.
I I still hear quite a few stories of medical professionals um, trying to talk people out of it, or trying to say that it will be too hard, or
Mm-hmm.
that potentially, depending on their disability, that the person might pass their disability on. So would they really want to do that?
Mm-hmm.
How could they do that to a child? All that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's definitely a lot of medical ableism that disabled women and people who can get pregnant still face.
Uh-huh. No, it really, honestly, it breaks my heart to hear that. I think, like we mentioned, there are a lot of issues women go through as a whole, but just to listen to what the disabled community goes through is just really awful. I can't imagine looking at somebody and being like, just because of your disability, you can't be a mom, or you can't choose to have a family, or you can't. Honestly, it boils down to you're not allowed to be happy,
Yeah,
which is basically like I feel like that's the message.
yeah. Or not even that you can't have a family, but we won't help you have a
Mm-hmm.
family. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and like for me, I know that if I ever get pregnant and decide to have a family, um, I I won't be able to give birth naturally, just because of
Yeah.
the way that my body works. There's no way that the spasticity that I deal with will be able to cope with that.
Mm-hmm.
So I will have to have a cesarean or a C-section.
Yeah.
And I can already foresee a bunch of issues around me having to fight for that, or justify it,
Mm-hmm.
or prove my um, fitness as a parent in a way
Mm-hmm.
that other people don't have to.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I can already see the challenge ahead, the challenge ahead. I'm hoping that by the time I get there, we've made some progress,
Mm-hmm.
and like conversations like this, and um uh, and other things will have made it easier. But I know that progress is slow.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's slow, but it's not impossible.
Yeah.
So hopefully, like you said, it would be better. And quite frankly, there's a lot of able-bodied people who should not be parents. So I don't know why we're like measuring it for other some people and not for some. But for anybody joining us right now, like we mentioned, we're safe to choose, so we provide information on safe abortions. But we really do believe that people should have the choice, and there should be reproductive justice. And at the end of the day, it's based on what the pregnant person
Hmm.
wants and what they feel that is best for their life. We can't force
Absolutely.
somebody to have an abortion. We can't force somebody to be pregnant and become a mother. That's not how life should work. I think everybody should be in charge of their own life. And I also think that there should be a lot of support for moms. There should be support for moms in the political sense in society. We do
Yeah,
give moms a lot of work. They do a lot of the unpaid labor. And I
absolutely.
think with what you were sharing, the way I see it is that we we're trying to kind of put a band-aid on the issue and not go to the root of it. Okay, it's like, okay, why do I believe that maybe somebody who's disabled can't be a mom? Is it because they lack the resources? Then I should make programs to help them with economic stipulants or help so they can do it. Is it because we don't have the adequate medical tools? Then I should fix my clinics or fix my hospitals so that they can accommodate these kinds of people. I think if we go to the root of the issue, we can see that it's manageable. It's not really something that can't be changed.
So can I ask, was there a specific um like instigating kind of thing behind starting Safe to Choose, or were you guys just kind of fed up with the lack of reproductive justice generally?
So I think what I really think that Safe to Choose where our value is in is that we believe that people should be able to choose no matter where they are. And I think we also try to see abortion not necessarily through a super ultra medical lens.
Hmm.
If you like, a lot of people can see that we follow protocols based on the World Health Organization. We also follow a lot of protocols from like PAHO and FIGO, and a lot of them have their abortion, for example, abortion with pill protocols online. There, so
Yeah.
anybody can see. So we know that people can have, for example, a safe self-managed abortion at home. And Safe to Choose just noticed that a lot of people, when going to maybe a medical setting or like a clinic, it's a very cold treatment. You go there, you're judged, people try to convince you not to have one. Whereas we have our like Safe to Choose counselors who are medically trained, and they're there to be your support throughout the whole process. Basically, like digitally hold your hand and tell you like, hi, like this is your choice. These are the laws in your country. Because some people might not have like the information about the laws in their
Yeah,
country because
absolutely.
yeah, because a lot of countries restrict it, so they don't share it on mainstream media. And
Yeah,
this year is election season for many countries, and
indeed.
we've seen how abortion is just like a hot topic in all of them. And unfortunately, it's like one end of the spectrum, or they're very against it and they use it as like their uh, motivation, like vote for me and we'll get rid of abortion, or they use it in their favor but don't actually do anything for abortion support or to eradicate unsafe abortions.
Yeah, and obviously, like one of the most publicized um and talked about endlessly elections that the world has coming up is the US
Yeah.
election, and we know for sure that one candidate uh does not doesn't give a shit about
Yeah,
reproductive
basically.
justice, and that the other person does. Um, so I think in that sense, we know what choice best supports the people who
Hmm.
can get pregnant in America, but it will be interesting to see how that plays out. And there's obviously a bunch of
Yeah.
other issues at play as well. But do you have like what's your read on the kind of global reproductive rights landscape at the moment?
That's such an interesting question. I think it depends on the region. For example, I think the US is the perfect example of how you can go backwards,
Mhm.
of how you could literally have like a really great solid ground that shows that you care about women or people who can become pregnant. You give them access to birth control, access to abortion, you try to give them good sexual education, and then you just go backwards because of antique beliefs or anything. And then, for example, you go to Latin America, you know, Colombia has abortions up to 24 weeks. Mexico decriminalized
Wow, I
abortions. You
didn't know
can't,
that.
yeah, it's great. And Mexico decriminalized
That
it last year. So you
Colombia.
can't be arrested for that. Argentina has it up to 12 weeks. A lot of the countries in Latin America are really stepping up. They're really saying, okay,
Wow.
let's go abortion.
And you never hear about that on the news either. Like I don't think there's enough um
Hmm.
airtime around the world, either on social media or through traditional news,
Hmm.
given to the wins that we make and the people that are working hard who may never get the credit or be like recognized
Hmm.
as the faces of that particular thing. But there are when you are feeling despair about the state of the world,
Hmm.
as so many of us do at particular moments at the moment, just remember that there are always people doing the work behind the scenes, and there are always people helping, even if they don't get as much airtime as
Hmm.
the people who seem to be undoing the good work.
Yeah, yeah. No, no, I know exactly. Unfortunately, for example, what happens in the US affects a lot of other countries
Indeed,
because yeah,
indeed.
because the money they invest, if it goes to a certain country, they're like, okay, you can use this money, but you can't use it for abortion. So they're kind of screwed in that sense. They can't really do anything. And
Yeah,
that's precisely why I think, for example, people from the US need to understand what the policies are in other countries and how the US affects that. Because it really, like, what happens in one place actually does affect many others.
yeah. Contrary to popular belief at the moment, countries and nations' choices and decisions don't exist in a vacuum. We are
Hmm.
actually all, for better or worse, interconnected politically and even more so now. But I think, unfortunately, lots of people have, and this is true no matter where you live, lots of people have tunnel vision about these sorts of things
Yeah.
and aren't able to see or have never had the opportunity to see how
Hmm.
everything's kind of interconnected.
Hmm. Hmm. No, that's totally right. And I think uh, from what I was mentioning about Latin America, for example, Colombia that made it to the 24 weeks, and Argentina and Mexico, I think it was in part because of the advocates and the activists and the feminist networks in the country that it was able to be
Yeah.
pushed towards that. So I wanted to ask you, what kind of is like the abortion advocacy space like in Australia? Would you say it's very strong? It's very united? Do you think there could be more work done?
So I think we are in a pretty good position
Mm-hmm,
because abortion has been decriminalized across the country.
mm-hmm,
So, but that has taken a lot of work and has had to happen at an individual state level. So there's been loads of people who will unfortunately never get credit
mm-hmm,
working behind the scenes to make sure that happens, whether they're lobbying politicians or whether they're protesting or explaining the benefits of reproductive health and choice to decision makers or whatever they're doing. So I think in that sense, we are doing okay,
mm-hmm,
but we also have so many other interconnected issues. Like I'm not sure um how much this has made international news, but at the moment we have a pretty vicious um male violence epidemic
oh
happening here.
wow.
So we are existing in a time where unfortunately I think it's like two women a week are being killed, mostly by either their current or former partners. So we have had rallies
Mm-hmm,
across the country for months,
mm-hmm,
organized by this wonderful organization called What Were You Wearing? What
mm-hmm,
Were You Wearing? Which I would recommend people check out if they haven't. And it's basically like everything's interconnected. I don't think you can have reproductive justice
mm-hmm,
while that's happening. I don't think you can have reproductive justice while um, Indigenous women are more at risk when giving birth.
mm-hmm,
I don't think you can have reproductive justice when women with disabilities are not even thought of in these conversations.
mm-hmm,
So So on paper and legally, technically, we're doing great, but
mm-hmm.
we still have a long way to go collectively, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think so too. I think that applies to a lot of countries that on paper you're allowed to, for example, have an abortion. And there's like maybe laws in place to try to avoid obstetric violence or try
Mm,
to help women who go to hospitals. And then in reality, it's a different thing because it's really ingrained in society and in our heads that, I don't know, like, for example, I read a study that was saying that women aren't given a lot of options to manage pain when they're during childbirth. And then after they have their child, like they'll have to yell and they'll have to scream for somebody to pay attention to them, and then the doctors will be
yeah,
like, oh, stop being hysterical, and it's like, no, what, like, this is crazy,
my body
why are we
literally
not
just
supporting ourselves?
transformed.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and I think also something I would be curious about and something I don't know enough about
Mm-hmm,
is to say what the aftercare psychologically is like, because let's be honest, people are having abortions hopefully
mm-hmm.
because it's their choice, but that doesn't mean the choice is easy or the
Yeah.
choice isn't complicated. And I'm hoping that women who can access that here in Australia are being provided uh, the appropriate mental health care
Mm-hmm,
and support if they need it. But in saying that, we also have a pretty significant mental health crisis going on
mm-hmm,
in this country at the moment in terms of the length of wait lists for psychologists and all of that kind of stuff. So my feeling is that that's probably a lacking and kind of un, underfunded or
mm-hmm,
undiscovered area, which definitely would need to improve.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Uh, Somebody commented that they went to one of the rallies of the organization that you mentioned on Sunday, and they were amazing and it was accessible. So if you're in Australia, if you're in Sydney, go check them out because it's important to get to know about the advocates in your local area. And bouncing off of what you said, we at Safe to Choose really take care and we really want to acknowledge mental health stages of the people who decide to have an abortion. Like you mentioned, a lot of the times it is a choice, and for some people it's like they know they want it. There's no doubt about it. That's the first option. But they still might have some thoughts that weigh heavy on their heads because of society. You know, society has always taught you that
Yeah.
abortions are bad. And if you have an abortion, you're a bad person, for example, which is not true. But things that you've heard since you were a girl and you've heard growing up and are
Yeah.
so ingrained in your brain, in one way or another, they're going to affect you.
And
So
there's
for
also
anybody,
the
mhm,
hormonal stuff that's
yeah,
happening. There's things that are beyond your control, like biologically, that
mhm,
even though it's like the absolute choice you want to make, your body might not be on the same page.
mhm, mhm. No, I agree. And I think that I also not just for people who have abortions, but even people who decide to give birth, like
Mm,
their hormones and their postpartum depression is such a very serious topic, and we don't hear
absolutely.
enough about it.
No.
Uh-huh. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm around your age, so I'm 26. I'm also just like not ready to have children.
Yep.
But for example, like we're very Gen Z, so on TikTok you just hear these horror stories about women
Hmm.
and their experience, and it's like, oh my God, like how is it 2024 and they still don't have the support?
Yeah, I guess it's because in a lot of ways, and like this is really getting into kind of the gender theory weeds, but in
Mm-hmm,
a lot of ways, women are still not really seen as human as men.
mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm.
that sounds really bleak and bitter, but it's the truth.
Yeah.
And I think there are so many ways that things need to change, and so many systems that need to be broken down, not only for women, but
Mm-hmm,
for men and boys too, because I think our reproductive health would be better collectively, like as a world, if young men and boys were emotionally invested in it too. If they understood that yes, it's a woman's body, yes, it's ultimately her choice because it's happening to her, but you do have a stake in this.
mm-hmm. And actually, we had with Here's Heat to Choose on How to Use, one of our sister programs. We had a live stream with a man to talk about like Father's Day, and he raised a point which is so interesting to us that for many men, your manhood is defined if you have children. So maybe even if they're not like emotionally ready or financially ready to have a child, they'll still want to have it because like they feel like they have to have it. And if we had these adequate talks about understanding when and if you want to be a father, contraception for men,
Hmm.
what role do men play in abortions, we can kind of like fight all these cultural norms and
And
stigma.
like the idea that if your partner gives birth to a baby, there's yes, there's a lot of physical um labor, I guess, no pun intended, that you can't participate in, whether
Mm-hmm,
that's breastfeeding or whatever. But there are ways in which you can be actively present as a father, and
mm-hmm,
I think it's also like getting rid of the notion that a dad looking after their kids is babysitting or
mm-hmm,
stuff like that.
mm-hmm.
No, it's you being a
Yeah,
parent and
yeah,
you
yeah.
picking up the load, and kind of we could we could debate all day about domestic um loads and responsibilities and how that is kind of unfairly always placed on women. As you said,
Mm-hmm,
we naturally exist at a much higher rate in the care and unpaid labor economy. So there's loads of intricate parts to sexual and reproductive health being achieved, but it's something that everybody needs to have some
mm-hmm,
um stake in.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I completely agree with you. So I think we'll ask you the final question
Uh-huh.
just to start wrapping up the live. For anybody who is listening to us, please leave any questions or comments you may have below. We will answer them. But yeah, just to kind of close, I would like to ask you, and for you, what can we do to improve SRHR access to those from the disability community? And what's kind of like the future you would like for the community?
Well, I think we have to start with recognizing that people with disabilities need
Mm-hmm,
sexual and reproductive health, and that needs to be presented at different stages. Like For some people, it's going to be learning about consent and bodily autonomy. Some
Hmm.
of the it's going to be about, okay, well, if you're having sex, how do you do so safely and in a way that makes you feel good and keeps communication and dialogue open
Hmm.
between the people involved. It's recognizing that people with disabilities have desire to have sex in the first place,
Hmm.
um, and allowing them to do that without it feeling perverted or like um, they're wrong for
Hmm.
doing that. And then kind of further, it's just like, again, bringing them into the conversation and not being so surprised if disabled woman or whoever it is, disabled person, shows up at your waiting room and says, "Hey, I want to start a family. How do I do that?"
Yeah, yeah, of course. Yeah, I think we only have one life. Like, it would be so mean to not let women with disabilities, live all their pleasures and all their dreams and
Yeah,
everything. Yeah.
absolutely.
We have a comment from Psychocinematic Podcast. Great discussion. More of the disabled community being in these conversations. I'm really glad you liked it, and I'm really appreciative of you, Hannah, for having this open voice and being part of this discussion. I learned so much, not only about uh, a community of people with disability, but also you as a person. I think it's so
Yeah,
interesting to learn more
thank
about you.
you. I love
Uh,
doing this.
no, no, I think you're such a great speaker. So hopefully all the platforms can open up for you. I wanted to add that just from somebody from the other side, the side of those who are
Mhm.
in organizations and who do the advocacy work from this end. I think our job is, like you mentioned, listen to those in the disability community, listen to what they actually want and need. Don't speak over them, don't
Yeah,
speak for them. Our job is to listen, to learn, and to provide as much support and help as we can, because
absolutely.
it's just different lived experiences, and the best way to learn is just listening to their story.
Yeah, couldn't have said it better myself.
So I think, just to wrap up, could you please share any of your projects, anything that's coming out? What are you working on right now? Anything that you would like the people to know?
Um, what would I like the people to know that I can tell you without getting in trouble? Let me think about it. So I have a book that details my my experiences as an Australian
Hmm.
um girl growing up disabled. It's available now. For anyone international who's watching this, you can get it on Amazon. It's called I'll Let Myself In. It looks like, hang on one second. It looks like this.
I love that.
Um, yeah, so it's a kind of personal essay collection about my experiences. That's probably the main thing you can do to support me right now.
Hmm.
I have some really cool kind of on-screen projects in the pipeline that I can't wait to share with people when the time is right. Basically, I'm just gonna try and be as loud as I can and as present as I can across as many different spaces as I can. And this is a wonderful opportunity to do that. So thanks for having me.
Oh no, that's so inspiring. I feel like anybody who's listening to us, like, listen to what Hannah just said. Be as loud as you can. Speak up as much as you can. Make your voice heard. We only have one life. Uh, MH Design Illustration commented, "Thank you both. Such an important discussion and privilege to hear Hannah speak." I agree. It's a privilege to be able to chat with
Oh,
her.
thank you.
And then Jelena Glavinic commented, "Health professionals need to also be better trained and equipped to deal with disability. From gynecologists to obstetricians, everyone needs to understand PWD's needs better." I 100% agree. Yeah, so I just share some extra information about Safe to Choose. We're safetochoose.org. We are an online e-health platform that provides care, support, and information to any person who needs abortion support. We have our free counseling services. So if you are ever in this position or you want to help a loved one go through just the information to make a choice, please reach out to our counselors. We also have training for abortion providers. So if you're an abortion provider and you want to just get more details and be more up to date about abortion support, please do so. And our channels are always open for communication. We are here to support you. The Nature of the Hound commented, such a good book. The audiobook is on Audible. Thank you for sharing that for those who want to buy it. I'm going to go read it because I just want to know more about your story.
Oh, thanks. And thank you so much for all the incredible work you do at Safe to Choose. We collectively, the world really needs it and appreciates it because reproductive rights seem basic and obvious to us, but apparently
Mm-hmm.
not.
Mm-hmm. Oh, thank you so much. And I really enjoyed our chat.
Yeah.
It was such a great time. And for anybody who couldn't hear the whole thing, we'll publish this on Instagram in full so you can rewatch it later and just listen to all of these comments. And yes, I hope you have a really great day. Hannah, it's your morning, so
Yes.
I
And
hope you really have a
have a
great
good
day.
sleep.
Thank you. And yeah, thank you so much for joining us. And everybody, remember, go check out Hannah's book, go check out her page, go check out her work. We need to uplift more voices, especially of people who are so incredible.
Thank you. All right.
Thank you.
Bye,
Bye.
guys.